Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
Miguel Merino didn't always want to be a winemaker, despite the fact that his dad, another Miguel, owned his own bodega in Briones. He worked in sports journalism and as a TV screenwriter before finally turning to wine in his late 20s. I caught up with him to chat about Rioja's new generation, single parcel wines, pruning just after a full moon, the impressive quality of his region's whites, and the advantages of clay soils in a warming world. Hi Miguel, how are you?
Hi Tim. Well, I'm so pleased to be here chatting with you.
Well, exactly. It's a very important week for me because I'm releasing my Rioja report this week, and obviously you're in it. You're one of the superstars, so it's good to be talking to you.
That's good to know.
Listen, I think you're in Briones, aren't you, right now?
Yes. You know, since a year ago, we actually live in the winery, so our commuting is like 5 steps home from office. Is quite handy.
That's the best ever commute, is 5 steps, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit like my commute is from my bedroom to my office.
Yeah, so we have the same problem then. Yeah,
exactly.
Sometimes.
Tell us, we're in the middle of winter now, just coming into spring. Are you pruning the vineyards right now?
Yes, we started planning in January, and in fact, this week is waning moon. You say
a waning moon, yeah.
Waning moon, yes. Yeah. So it's a very good week for planning. So this week we'll try to speed up a little bit.
Yeah. I think so. It's a full moon, isn't it? Is that a waning moon or a waxing moon? I think
it's a full moon today. So from tomorrow it will be the best days to start pruning.
It's interesting because I think you're saying that depending on when you prune can have an impact on the canes. You have the canes that you have in the vineyard. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. You know, this was explained to me by the Kupani brothers. And they are such a fantastic growers. Mm-hmm. And depending on what you seek, what you want, is better to prune when the moon is getting smaller or bigger. You know, if you want. For instance, we just bought this year a small plot of Viura, an old, very old parcel that was, not too look after, and we need to reinforce these plants. So it's better that we prune when the moon is going from full moon to smaller, because then if you want the branches to go thinner and longer, it's better to do it when you're actually reaching full moon.
Interesting, yeah. So you can actually manipulate the plant depending on when you prune it. It's amazing.
Yes, you're supposed to. But yes,
I'm supposed to.
This is empirism, so you need to look it.
Listen, talk to you a little bit about your background. Some people listening to this podcast will have known your dad, who sadly died a couple of years ago. Also Miguel, and he worked in the wine business most of his life, really, and eventually was in sales, and then he set up his own winery in 1994. Was wine a big part of your life when you were a kid? I mean, were you always drinking wine with your dad?
Yeah, it was. I mean, trade was a big thing when I was small. I don't know if you know, but as kids we lived in Logroño, which is the main city in Rioja, from Monday to Friday. But then the weekends we went to this little town in the south of Logroño, in the range of mountains, and we had no TV, no telephones, no central heating. So it was like living in the Middle Age. But at the same time, I remember being surrounded by Australians, Canadians, Americans, of course, British, and I remember Charles Metcalfe singing opera and I was 3 or 4 years old.
So Charles is a wine writer who's also a professional opera singer, yeah. So
yes, and so it was a very eclectic combination of being in this shelter with no facilities, but at the same time with drinking wines from all over. I mean, I didn't drink wine when I was 6 or 8, but I remember doing it. And then when my father got a buyer or man of confidence of the Swedish monopoly, he had to taste and buy wines from all over Spain. And I remember, he organizing Ribera del Duero tastings with the first pesqueras, and I remember Jumilla, I remember Priorats in 92, 93,
Okay.
So it was very cool, it was a great way. So vineyards and barrels were not a big thing when I was a kid, because my father started his winery in 94. I was 14 by then. But I remember wine and people from all over the world in my childhood. Yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting that your international education continued, because as a teenager you went to live in the States. You did your final year of high school in America, and I think talking to you, you've always said that was very significant year for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, for me, I've always said it was the most important year in my life, at least in my young life, because I think I became myself in that year. For 17 years, I had lived with my parents, like you always know what's coming next. And I needed to breathe. I got along very well with my parents. I was very lucky with them. But I needed to breathe. And that year I spent a lot of time on my own, because, there was no internet by then. So I was writing letters to friends and family. But I spent a lot of time on my own, and I actually realized that I enjoyed it. When I came back, I was another person. It was a tough experience. I think of it with a lot of love, and definitely it made me where I am, I think.
Yeah, which is a good thing. It's interesting that you didn't want to be a winemaker, though, to start with, did you? You went off to study journalism and media at Salamanca University. Was your idea to become a journalist? I hope not.
Yes,
I could have told you not to do it. The money's terrible.
Yes, I was a fool. Since I was 12 or 13, I wanted to be a sports journalist. So that was my dream. And I went to Salamanca to study. And right in the middle of my studies, I was offered a scholarship in Diario AS, which is the main sports paper in Madrid. And I went there and worked for the summer. And when I finished my term there, they offered me a job. They offered me to stay. And I decided I didn't want to spend my life writing about David Beckham's underwear or things like that. So it was very frustrating, because my dream was there. I was 20 years old. They offered me to stay, and I said I don't want to live in Madrid, and I don't want to spend my life writing about this. So I went back to Salamanca, finished my studies, but I already knew I didn't want to be what I thought I wanted.
And where did you go next? Did you go back to help your dad in the winery, or did you then move to London?
Yeah, that's what happens when you finish university. It's like a cliff opens in under your feet, right? Because since you are 4 years old, you know exactly what you're doing next year, which is the next degree, the next grade. And so I was 22. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to Madrid. I didn't want to go back home, for sure. And so I decided to go to London, and it was funny, because it was in London where I really got into wine. By chance I got a job at Freixenet, and then all the people and friends that I made in London were somehow working in the wine industry. They work in Odd Beans, Majestic. So I had French, Italian friends, and every evening we would get and drink wines from all over, and it was great. Those
days. It was a good
time.
time.
It was fantastic, because in those days in Rioja, you were lucky if you found a bottle from Navarra. So living in London and drinking wines from New Zealand and South Africa and France, it was great. It was a great time.
And then you did something. You did a master's degree in wine marketing and business, and you told me once that you hated it, right? So why did you do it?
I hated it. So when I was 23, I was living in London, and my dad told me, I need help. He had started selling or trying to sell his wines. He was going to hire someone. So I thought it was a good idea to join him, which, thinking now, it was not a good idea, but by then I thought it was. And so I joined him, and he thought, okay, you should study something about wine. But his career had been always trade, and he thought the best thing for me, and I agreed, was to study marketing and sales and managing. And I hated it. I did it because I'm a good guy, and once you start, you finish. but I hated it, and I hated my job because it was so hard, Tim. We were a small winery, unknown, making classic wines when everyone was looking for huge wines, with Parker wines and all that. And it was impossible to sell our wines. And I was 23, 24, so much pressure for me. And so for 7 years, I worked there, and I hated it. I hated wine and my life and everything.
But it's a good job, but then you finally decided you wanted to make wine, didn't you? Yeah. Not selling it. So you did another degree, and this time it was a master's in viticulture and winemaking.
Yeah.
And that's when your life changed, because you met lots of friends who've become lifelong friends, really, who were winemakers. So you'd finally decided at 28 you wanted to make it, yeah? As you want to make wine.
Exactly. The thing is that I realized that if I was tempted to throw it, I was not happy, so I was tempted to throw everything away, to throw it all away. And I said, okay, if I'm going to stay in wine, I need to know more about vineyards and winemaking. And I told my dad so. So I went back to school while I was still working and had this master's in University of Rioja. And it was great because I learned a lot, and more important, I met very important people for me, like Javier Arizcuren, Mariví Hernaiz, who works with Telmo in Remeyuri.
Telmo Rodriguez, yeah.
Yeah. Then people like Pedro Balda. Through him, I met David Gonzalez. And for the first time, I felt I had my circle of friends in the wine world, because until then, I was feeling I was living my father's life, not my life. I had been always dreaming of doing other things, working abroad, and all that. And I was living in Rioja, working with him, and I was following his steps. And I didn't feel I was living my life. So I that year was very important for me. Yeah.
But even then, you didn't get a job making wine. You went to Madrid again to become a screenwriter, right? So what happened there? Did you change your mind again?
I blew off. I became 30 years old, and I blew off. I mean, after 7 years trying, I had it, and I said, okay, let's forget about it. I studied journalism, and I'm gonna be a screenwriter. So I went to Madrid, and I wrote for TV. But then again, it was exactly 10 years after my first attempt to live in Madrid, and it happened the same. I had a good job, and it was good to see how TV works and all that. But ever since I was a kid, I've always been a helpless existentialist. I think while pregnant, my mom used to read Jean-Paul Sartre, which should not do. No, I think it's dangerous. And I've always been seeking happiness, but not in a hedonist way, but in a very existentialist way. I mean, if I'm not happy if I don't feel complete, I get depressed. So I was living in Madrid, and I felt, am I going to spend my life living in this huge city and writing soap operas? So so no, I went back to Rioja, and
but you went to Chile first, didn't you?
Yes, I went back to Rioja, and then I decided, let's try wine, but let's try wine in a winemaking way, and I went to Chile. Yeah, I went to make a harvest at Pérez Cruz in Maipo. And it was great. It was great, Tim. It was, for 3 months, I was completely focused on winemaking. I was working hard, learning a lot, and I was happy. Those were the happiest 3 months in years for me. And when I came back from Chile, I decided that was what I was going to be making in life.
And then you got a job, didn't you, with Gómez Cruzado? You talked about David Gonzalez, and he gave you a job as the cellar master. Yeah, I just wondered what you learned from him, because I get the impression he was a big influence on your winemaking style, wasn't he?
Yeah, not only in my winemaking style, also in my life. I mean, David is a crucial person for me, because he gave me a lot of confidence. He had been just appointed general manager of Gómez Cruzado, and he needed someone of his entire confidence in the winery. and he's not someone that is going to be on your back, for the whole day. I think he gave me the grounds to grow. Working with him for 4 years was fantastic. David comes from he had as a young guy, he had been working for El Coto, for Felix Solis, so huge wineries, industry wineries. So he knows the enology, he knows the protocols. But then he's changed his career into more vineyards, and he has a sensibility to make beautiful wines. And it's funny because his wines and my wines are very different. I think what he made was give me the foundations to have my own personality. I'll always be thankful to David.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important, isn't it? I mean, in 16, you got more involved with your dad's winery again, I think on the winemaking side. And the following year, 2017, you and your partner, Erica, you joined your dad full time. I just wonder, what was it like going back there? And do you and your dad have very different ideas about the styles of wine you wanted to make?
Well, my dad was very generous. He told me he was growing old. He told me that he thought that I could be happier. Now the winery was working much better than when I first joined him as a young guy. And in fact, he never reproached me to having left. In the opposite, he told me he had been thinking how difficult it was for me to do what I did when I was a young guy. And so he told me, please come back. You can change everything. You can even change the name if you want. It's funny because I'm also named Miguel.
Miguel Merino, yeah.
I wasn't going to change it, and he knew it. But he told me, come. The winery is selling the wines. Just come and improve the wines. Focus on that. I mean, so it was. You couldn't say no. And the good thing is that I already have. In that moment, I had my circle of friends. I have my own personality. I didn't feel I was following his life. I already felt I was living my life, and I think it's very important to work in your head. And I always say what it was hell for me for 7 years, now it's paradise. So and it's the same place. So
we'll talk a little bit about this change of style in a minute, maybe, and what you've changed. But just tell us first of all about Briones, because you're the bodega. You live in Briones. You're based in Briones, and the grapes you get are pretty much. I think they're all from Briones, aren't they? Just tell us what makes Briones unique. I mean, because you own vineyards and you also buy grapes, don't you? How different is Briones from the other side of the river, what's known as the Sonsiera, which is mostly the Rioja Alavesa and a little bit of Rioja Alta? How different is it?
Yeah, it's interesting because from the day one, my father decided that our project was going to be 100% Briones. Not only because he thought this was the best town, which he thought, but because he knew we needed to be authentic if we wanted to succeed. And I think that was very important. We started with 0 vineyards. Now we own 8 hectares and we control 6. We buy grapes from 4 suppliers. And Briones compared to Sonsiera, Sonsiera is mainly, we share the same climate, San Vicente, La Bastida, Briones have the same climate, but Sonsiera is mainly poor limestone soils. If you take La Guardia to Briñas, it's mainly that. And Briones is more clay. There is a huge diversity of soils in Briones, but mainly, it's a limestone with more clay. If you compare the wines, San Vicente or La Bastida or La Guardia, those Tempranillos from the very, very beginning, it's, this floral bloom of fruit, which we never get in Briones. Young wines in Briones are not half as good as the wines in Avalos or San Vicente or La Guardia. But we have more structure, we have lower pH, more acidity, and we have fresher wines. And it's funny because we harvest much later than they do in San Vicente or La Bastida. I have friends who have vineyards in San Vicente and Briones, and they harvest everything in San Vicente, and then they start harvesting in Briones. So the wines in Briones are a bit more structured, less appealing when young, but with a very long life, I think.
Interesting. And a lot of the Sonsiera faces south, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And we face depends a bit on the hill you are or the slope, but we have a higher diversity of sun exposures to it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Interesting. Just tell us, you've got two lines at Miguel Merino. You've got a classic line, which is the line that your dad established, really, which has got a reserve and a Grand Reserva, so the classic styles, really. And you've got a more modern one. Just tell us how they differ, because I kind of think in a way they're moving a bit closer together, aren't they, as well?
Yeah, I think that was what my dad was afraid of. That I will change too much the classic line, when we came when we joined him, all our efforts were focused on creating and then improving the new wines. We didn't change much things about the classic line. Of course, you ferment in a different way. I think we're a bit lighter fermenting, even with the classic line. And in my opinion, we've just got a bit more precise with the wines. The idea is to keep these two lines quite different, but of course, it's the winemaker has changed, so there are some changes, yes. But
I suppose I want to ask you in a way just how. I mean, I think of your winemaking style as being very elegant. You don't lose a lot of wood, you don't lose a lot of extraction. I think that despite what you said about Briones making more powerful wines, I don't think your wines are super powerful in style. I think they're still very elegant. Would you say that's a good description of your winemaking style?
That's what we try. I mean, as said, we are in Briones, which always gives you a lot of structure. It's a bit like a pomar in Côte d'Or. And we work mainly with old vineyards, which usually mean low yielding. So if we are not gentle while fermenting, we can end up having huge wines, which we don't want. So we know that the wines are going to be structured without trying too hard. And that's what we try. We try to be very subtle, very gentle at the winemaking, and also at the amount of new oak and the coopers that we work with, because it's essential with the new line, with the vineyard wines, but also for Reserva, Gran Reserva, we are trying to be more gentle.
You've got these three amazing single vineyard wines, La Quinta Cruz, La Ínsula, and La Loma. Can you just tell us about the difference between them in terms of the grape varieties you use and a little bit about the styles of them maybe and the vineyard sources?
Yeah. What I really think is that if you are going to release a single vineyard wine, there must be a huge reason for it. The wine has to be different, it has to be unique, because otherwise it's a bit pointless to make a single vineyard wine. La Quinta Cruz and La Ínsula are quite unique because, La Quinta Cruz is 100% Mazuelo in Rioja Alta, which is very hard to find. The most important thing here is the combination of Mazuelo, which is a Mediterranean grape, planted on a very alluvial, poor soil, what we call cascajo, sandy and pebbly. And then La Ínsula, it's a tiny little vineyard of ungrafted plants of Garnacha, all the way from the beginning of the 20th century, planted on a sandbank, which is very, very unusual also here in Rioja Alta. So those two wines are unique for sure. And then La Loma for us is our most special vineyard. And not only the most special, but also the best. La Loma is right the place where the limestone soils from Son Sierra meet the ferric clay soils of the south part of Rioja Alta, the Bañares, Castañares, Santo Domingo. So it's incredible because you stand in La Loma, you look south and the soil is red, you look north and the soil is yellow. And in fact, it's very funny. We last year we bought the plot right next to La Loma, which was used for cereal, and we analyzed the soil, and it's so different to La Loma, and it's right beside. It's 1 meter away, and it's another soil. It's much more limestone, much more calcareous than La Loma.
Yeah, it's interesting that you work without herbicides and pesticides, don't you? Across the 36 plots. I just wonder, are you going to go organic?
I don't think there is an alternative. I mean, I think that if you work in agriculture in Europe, and if you're not organic or planning to become organic, you're gonna be facing difficult times because there is not an alternative. I mean, not only because authorities, importers, customers, and journalists demand it, but also because it's right and it's better. It's more work, but it's true that it's more work. You know, it's much more work to work without the herbicides than to do. So you need to if they're gonna pay your grapes at 70 cents, you can't not use herbicides. But for us, yes, and in fact, last year half of our vineyards were already treated organic. We're gonna do so for 3 or 4 years and see how it goes. We also need to learn, because you don't learn in one day, in 1 year. But yes, the answer is absolutely yes. We are planning to go organic.
And do you pay a little bit more to your growers to farm organically?
Yes, I mean, we the kilo that we pay less we work only with 4 growers, which are neighbors and friends. They sell to us the grapes from their oldest vineyards, and then they take the average grapes to big wineries. And the one we pay less is 30 cents more expensive than what they receive in big wineries.
Which would be what, 70 cents a kilo, would it?
Yeah, so we pay €1.10, €1.20 minimum. Because we can, and because we think it's worth, and all vineyards, no herbicides. You need to pay for that.
Tell us a little bit about regions outside Rioja. I just wonder which regions have had the most influence on you.
I think it's hard to point out one. I'd like to say Burgundy, but I'm not so rich, so
you can't afford it.
No, I cannot. I think in general terms, I like cool wines more than warm wines. So I really like the wines from Loire, the Cabernet Francs from Loire, or lately I'm drinking a lot from the northern Italy. I really like Barolos and Alba, Lange. And then in a bit of everything, really. Inside Spain, I think in the last years, I really like what was going on in Galicia, Canary Islands, but also in Jumilla or Ribera del Duero. I think Ribera del Duero is also changing for good in many small projects, and we are drinking that as well. I think it's more winemaking styles that influence than actually regions.
I think I agree with you, really. Let's talk a bit more about Rioja, because Rioja is not perceived by a lot of people as a fine wine area. There are fine wines within it, but it sells a lot of wine at cheap prices. Does it almost make sense to talk about 2 Riojas, a kind of industrial Rioja producing cheap wines for supermarkets, and the kind of things that you guys are doing and your friends, your generation?
Absolutely. I think we have a problem on the low end, but not especially on an oak fruity young wines, especially with cheap reservas and grand reservas, which I think they do so much harm to the region and to our brands. And yes, there are 2 Riojas. It's true that it's a bit unfair, because we have a winery that employs 5 people, including my wife and me. And we work 14 hectares, so we are not important to the region. You have wineries that maybe they're hiring 100 people, and they are very essential for the wealth of the region. But I think we all need a way to coexist. I think it's very important. I'm not going to say that everyone has to be a vigneron, because that's impossible. But I think that we all need to respect each other's works and to row in the same direction, because otherwise we're gonna be suffering in the next years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, what do you think of the Viñedos Singulares category? Because it was introduced in 2017. You haven't made any of your wines a Viñedo Singular. Would you rather see a system a bit like a Burgundian system of Grand Cru, Premier Cru, village wines, regional wines? I mean, what do you think of that as a model for Rioja?
I think with Viñedos Singulares, the ability of capitalism to subsume every movement against capitalism. And I think small growers, we saw Viñedo Singular as that, as a reaction by Consejo Regulador to our demands. But at the same time, I think we all behave a bit like teenagers, like we want this, and then they give it and it's like, oh, no, it sucks, we don't want it. Being honest, I think it's been a bit like that. I think the problem with Viñedos Singulares is that if we spend a lot of money on promotion and promoting them, and if the wines are not the best in Rioja, and people go and attend to these tastings, and they walk out saying, well, top Rioja is not so. So we must be sure that Viñedos Singulares have not only special vineyards, but also great wines. I think it's important. And yeah, I'm very happy to see Rioja walking towards terroir and vineyards. I mean, for us, it's great, and we completely agree on that. But I think it's hard to see how we can classify. Who is going to classify the vineyards and decide what's a Grand Cru, what's a Premier Cru? Because we don't have a Napoleon III now. Around.
Shall I volunteer?
Yeah. No, I mean you are doing it, and I don't know anyone that knows Rioja better than you. I mean, you know Rioja on a general perspective better than any of us because you know everything. And of course you could do it, but the thing is that whatever you say is Grand Cru, we will agree, and whatever you say is not, they will not agree. So
exactly.
That's the problem.
It's very true, isn't it? Just talk a bit more about your dad, because your dad was a very special person to me and to many people who loved him dearly, and we all miss him a lot. Just what did you learn most from Miguel about wine and life? From
a company point of view, wine point of view, to have, I think the most important thing I learned from him was to have a personality, because I remember when I was younger and, we were making classic wines and nobody wanted classic wines, and I tried to persuade him to change. He told me, you keep a route, you keep a course, right? And sometimes the wind will help, sometimes it won't, but you keep your north. And I think that was very, very important. I think of that a lot. It's like now we are. I think now we have the wind helping, but I'm sure there will be times where it'll be difficult, and we must keep our way. And from a personal point of view, I think I wish I had learned more from him, because he was such an optimistic guy. I remember problems did not affect him. I think his antidote was humor. His sense of humor was
definitely
so huge that it was bigger than any problem. And it doesn't. I mean, I have a sense of humor, but I'm not such an optimistic person. I wish I was more like he was.
Probably right. I mean, you're part of this amazing group of young winemakers called the Martes of Wine. Martes being Tuesday, and you meet on a Tuesday and you taste wines blind and you chat together. And I've always enjoyed spending time with you. I mean, how important is that group both to you and to Rioja? Because you're very supportive of each other, and you've all kind of grown together, haven't you?
It's great, because when we joined back, my dad, Eric, and I, we decided to leave the city and come to live to Rioja Alta, because we thought if we are going to be winemakers and we want to live our lives as winemakers, we must do it with all our senses, and you can't do that in the city, in my opinion. But we were alone, and all of a sudden these guys and girls welcome us and introduce us to their lives. And these guys are 5th, 6th, 10th generation of growers, so they know everything about viticulture, which it wasn't my occasion, it wasn't my thing. And I've learned so much from them. I still, this morning I was talking to Miguel, discussing about pruning.
This is Miguel Aguiluz.
And yesterday I was Aguiluz from Cupani, and and 2 days ago I was tasting a Barolo with Jose to see what we thought.
Jose Gil.
Yeah, Jose Gil. Yeah. And the thing is that's it. I mean, we are so happy when any of us gets a success, and we help each other. Not only with Master of Wine, we this extends to Arturo from Artuque, or Tom, or Sandra.
Tom from Exopto.
Yeah. And Sandra Bravo from Tologno, and I mean it's a bigger thing than that. It's true that my close group as the Masters of Wine, and it's great. We share problems, we share success, and we share importers and everything.
Are we seeing more projects from younger people, do you think, in Rioja?
I hope so. We need it. We need it. I think the most important thing, Tim, is that now I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I think that maybe we were not ready as a region to be as complex as we are now. I think that maybe it was a good thing that we were so easy to understand. In 1 minute, people knew all you need to know about Rioja. Three regions, three categories. Because Spain was Europe's Iran, and this is changing. I think the country is evolved so much. I think the region has evolved so much, and now on a very natural way, all this complexity, because Rioja is a very complex and diverse region, as you know. I think all this is coming, and we are also able to go out and sell it, and also people are ready to understand the complexity of Rioja, and now I think we cannot stop. That's the point.
Well, I think that's great, because there's a lot of talk about crisis at the moment. Lots of unsold wine, low grape and wine prices. The possibility of a new denominación with the Viñedos de Álava in the Basque Country, which may break away. How do you think things are going to develop over the next decade? Are you feeling positive?
Well, with Viñedos with Viñedos de Álava, it's incredible because we are 45 million people in Spain, so it's impossible that we get to agreements. We need to pay some citizens to do the job, to get to agreements, and instead of doing that, they don't do the job, and then they throw us against each other's. And I think that Viñedos de Álava is encouraged by the Basque politicians, which, by the way, are probably the best politicians in Spain. They've done a great job with the Basque Country in the last 20 years. But I think they are playing with the future of those wineries, because you know how difficult it is and how long it takes to create a name in the wine world. And I think that inside Rioja, I disagree with Consejo Regulador in so many ways. But I think inside Rioja, you can be small, you can be authentic, you can sell your wines on a very decent prices, and there is a way out in Rioja. And I think Viñedos de Álava, if they're lucky, they're going to have 15, 20 very difficult years at least. And I don't know if all the wineries are going to be able to go through, because it's making carbonic maceration wines and selling your wines in the Basque Country. It's a model of business from the 1940s, and I don't think it's viable for too long. So I'm a bit angry with that, because I think their politicians are playing with the future of winemakers there.
Because they won't be able to do both Viñedos de Álava and Rioja. They'll have to choose between the two, right?
Yes, it's still a bit blurry, but of course, Consejo DOC Rioja is not going to put things easy for them, as they can understand. So I think that on the low end, we're going to have a lot of trouble, and I think on the high end, more and more diversity and complexity and small growers. For me, a big part of the future of Rioja, of interest in Rioja, is the children of the cosecheros. People who used to make carbonic maceration reds and sell it in 100 kilometers around. And they have great vineyards. Their children are studying, traveling, like Jose Gil, like Ricardo Fernandez from Abeica. I think Abel Mendoza before all of us. And I think that those are the models. I think that's the way to go if you are a small owner in our region.
Yeah. To be a last thing, you've got a young family. You've been busy running the winery, even though you live above the bodega. What do you do to escape from wine? Do you still write? Do you still like writing because you were a journalist and you were a screenwriter? Do you like sport? How do you get away from it?
Yeah, before I had kids, I think hiking mountains, reading and traveling were my three hobbies. Now is a bit more difficult, but I'm not too concerned because I'm happiest than ever. So it's and I know my, now it's funny because my eldest daughter Lena, She goes to dance class for 2 days a week for 45 minutes. So I take her on my running clothes.
Yeah.
So I put her in dance. I run for 42 minutes, and then I pick her up and come home. So that's the time I have.
That sounds good. Anyway, and you're making better wines than ever, and so it's fantastic. Lovely to talk to you. In the week of the publication of my Rioja report, we'll all see how you do later this week. Miguel, so great to talk to you, and see you soon.
See you soon. Ciao.
Miguel really is one of the young superstars of Rioja right now, and I love the clarity of his winemaking and thought. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Stephanie O'Toole from Mount Horrocks in Australia's Clare Valley. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @timatkin and on Instagram @timatkinmw. See you next week.